And, of course, they have, success with wrestling. And, you talked about this decision being mostly political and a lot of it about money. And who's got more political influence and money than the United States?
Right.
Can we maybe look at them, our good neighbors to the south, to maybe save wrestling?
Well, it's not even just the U.S. I mean, you look at all the powerhouses in the sport. You have the U.S., you have Russia, you have Iran, you have Turkey, you have Japan, you have all these Koreans, you have so many different countries that are so strong, not just in sport, but politically, who can have such influence on this. And for them to sit silently, I don't think that's going to happen. There's too many factors that come into play. And I cannot say that, wrestling will be back in, because, again, there's so many different politics, like with the pentathlon being on the chopping block. Juan Antonio Samaranch, the former IOC president, his son was the president of pentathlon, the international organization.
Ah.
So that was huge, he was huge in keeping that sport alive.
What is a pentathlon exactly? I don't even know.
So like I mentioned before, it's shooting, running, there's fencing,
really?
horseback riding, and swimming, I believe.
How good could you be at any of those individual things if you have to do all of them?
Well, there's also the decathlon, where you have 10 sports.
See, these things are ridiculous to me. I don't understand how these things stay in and wrestling goes. A sport where you're shooting a gun, you're sword fighting, you're riding a horse. What is that? I don't even understand that. That's crazy.
If you're shooting a gun while fencing on a horse, that's pretty impressive.
Maybe. But only if you also have to wrestle someone at the end of it.
Right, while you're in a pool.
Yeah. Do you think something like that could save wrestling, where, it's like a series of events, and at the end, there's a wrestling match?
Well, possibly. Who knows? Who knows?
I don't know.
It's really frustrating. When I heard the news, it was like a slap in the face as somebody who's starting to coach now, because what do you tell the athletes that are invested? And I don't know, I think it was you that said it, Kevin, that there's kids that are getting recruited from different schools to come to relocate, and how many athletes have done that? And now, if it's out, what are they doing? They're going to stay in for a CIS championship or for a national title without any possibility of making an Olympic team. It's very hard as a coach to have to explain that to athletes.
I mean, this is gonna affect you in a real way. I mean, you are a wrestler. You are a guy that's devoted your entire life to this sport. And that's why when I heard the news yesterday, I immediately thought of you and had to get you on the show, because it's a real shame, and wrestling is just such a great sport, and it has such a rich history. You never would have thought that something like this could even be possible.
No, not at all. Not at all. I was with George St-Pierre last night. We were doing some technique at practice, and he was just he was saying, I can't believe this is the stupidest thing in the world. And he's been wrestling with us for almost 12 years now, and he's grown so attached to the sport. He was shocked. Absolutely shocked. I mean,
yeah. And, George St-Pierre is such a great wrestler. How do you think he became such a great wrestler? By training with you and everybody else at the Montreal Wrestling Club. And when great wrestlers don't have that end game of the Olympics, they won't be around as much. So then, it's going to affect everybody in all sorts of ways, in all kinds of combat sports, especially in MMA. Oh,
absolutely. Absolutely. But it's interesting. I read a quote on Twitter the other day. I think it was by Mayhem Miller.
All right.
Matt Mayhem Miller. He wrote, does everybody, something along the lines of, this is a good thing because now all the talent from wrestling is going to go into MMA.
Mm-hmm.
But that is such a bad way to look at it, because it's like a feeder. Amateur wrestling is a feeder for MMA. It shouldn't be, just everybody goes into MMA. because every athlete that goes into MMA has a background, a strong pedigree in an individual sport. Maybe it's boxing, maybe it's jiu-jitsu, maybe it's wrestling, or Muay Thai. You know, you need those individual sports, and that's what makes MMA so unique, because you have different styles of fighter who are specialists in a given combat sport.
And it's not like MMA is ever going to envelop all martial arts. You know, I don't think there's ever going to be a day where jiu-jitsu doesn't exist on its own or wrestling doesn't exist on its own because MMA has just kind of taken over and become the only martial art. Because you see that now, right? I mean, you see mixed martial artists today in the UFC that never had a background in anything, but they're just mixed martial artists. That's just what they've been training. They've been training everything at the same time. But to be able to do that, you still have to go to people like you who is a wrestler, and that is what you do, because it just sharpens their wrestling skill. And I don't think that if you train everything, you can necessarily get great at anything in particular. You need other people that are training things, you know, individual things. And there's always going to be guys like you who don't want to do MMA, and they will always, you know, be wrestlers. There's always going to be somebody like me who doesn't want to get punched in the face, but I'll grapple, you know, I'll do jiu-jitsu or something like that.
Of course.
And, you know, it's sad that these sports, these individual martial arts, aren't being, you know, taken over. And I think you're right. You know, Dana White even expressed a similar sentiment, saying, well, now all the wrestling talent might go into just straight MMA. But, you know, I don't think it goes that way. And I think that wrestling just makes you a better mixed martial artist when you do decide, you know, if you decide to go over into that sport, because just the cutting weight and being it just develops so many great fighters. You know, it's obvious by what we've seen everywhere in the UFC.
Right. The culture of the sport creates tough athletes. You know, a lot of them are grinders, and they're able, like you said, with the cutting of weight, they know how to do that. They know how to push in the match. It creates a very special type of athlete. Very special type of athlete.
Yeah, it certainly does. Wrestling, very, very important. And, you know, I hope that the IOC comes to their senses and figures it out. You know, one guy who is a mixed martial artist and was an amateur wrestler, Chael Sonnen, actually had a rant on a UFC show last night about this, and he put a lot of the blame on FILA, the governing body that kind of looks over wrestling. Do you think they should shoulder some of this blame?
Well, I feel like I said before with the weight classes being changed, FILA kept agreeing to these different ideas. Okay, we'll change from 10 weight class to 7 weight classes. We'll change the matches from 2 3-minute rounds to 3 2-minute rounds, best out of 3. And the sport has just changed so much because nobody stood their ground to say, you know what, this is what the sport is how we're keeping it. And we're slowly being pushed in a direction that we don't want to go. I know as an athlete in the sport, it was very frustrating to see all the rule changes and all the weight class changes. And so, you know, Chael Sonnen brings up a great point, saying that, you know, FILA is partly to blame. And perhaps these are some of the ideas that would be reason why they're partly to blame, because they didn't stand their ground in certain things.